The following statements constitute a non sequitur. I am richer than you are, therefore I am superior to you. Or, I am more eloquent than you are, therefore I am superior to you. But the following conclusions are better. I am richer than you are, therefore my property is superior to yours. Or, I am more eloquent than you are, therefore my elocution is superior to yours. But you are neither property nor elocution. In chapter 44, Epictetus is telling us about a fallacy that people often engage in, and we do ourselves. So he gives examples of this. I am richer than you are, therefore I am superior to you. Or, I am more eloquent than you are, therefore I am superior to you. And we sometimes say these sorts of things, or think them to ourselves. We certainly do these kinds of comparisons with respect to other people. We may do it in a much more complex way, where we look at where we fall into a certain kind of hierarchy or scale and where other people fall. And all of that is essentially along the same lines. Notice, too, that it can work the other way around, where we say, I have less money than you, therefore I am inferior to you. We can even go so far as to try to turn the lack of money or resources or whatever we want into something that's a sign of superiority and say, I have less money than you, therefore I am superior to you, because we all know rich people are jerks, or they're part of the 1%, or they can't be trusted, or any of those sorts of things. All of these inferences, according to Epictetus, are essentially fallacious. That is, they are bad arguments that have a determinate structure. We can identify them fairly well. We can only do this when we bring them out and recognize them as kinds of arguments, rather than being facts about the world, as people often like to present them, or as people internalize them and then sort of act on them without thinking them through, without ever making them explicit. It's only when we think it through that we can see that there's no inherent connection between these, and that's what he points out here. He says the following conclusions are better. Here's what you can actually draw as a conclusion from I'm richer than you. I'm richer than you, so therefore my property is superior to yours. He's not saying that everything is superior. He's saying that if you're richer, you have more money, or you have a nice house, or you have a place that you don't have to, have such a bad commute, or, the roof isn't falling in, or whatever it is that you want. I've got nice clothes, so therefore I can dress better than you. Okay, that's fine, right? I have this skill, or this skill, or this skill, therefore in that matter I am superior to you. Probably we could reverse it around and say there's many other people who are better at that, and I'm also inferior in that respect to those people. Now notice what he's doing there. He's saying, yes, there is a greater and lesser with respect to riches, with respect to eloquence, lexis in this, with respect to medical expertise, with respect to how much muscle you've got, or anything along these lines. We could pick silly things like, I've got one chalkboard, you probably don't have a chalkboard. In respect of chalkboards, I'm superior to you. Now, if having a chalkboard is a bad thing, then you are superior to me. But notice we've confined it to just that thing. And that's what Epictetus thinks that we need to do if we want to maintain a proper perspective and not get suckered in to thinking that these things like riches, or the attractiveness of our body, or the kinds of clothes that we wear, or the positions that people give us really tell us anything fundamental about value of human persons. Notice what he says to bring this to a close. You are neither property nor elocution. You have property, but you are not your property. we fall into this quite easily. We make mistakes in identifying ourselves with the things that we have, or even the things that we aspire to. We join a program and we think that because we're doing that, that somehow says something significant about us as a person, as the value that we have as a person. So, you join a gym and you even go and exercise. You don't just, subscribe to the gym and never go. You go and exercise. That's great. Healthy for your body. Maybe you meet some nice people there. Provided you don't get too competitive with everybody else, it's probably a good thing overall. But that's only about the gym. That's only about physical exercise or networking. That's not about you as who you are in your core. Although, of course, you could use the gym as an opportunity to, say, practice Stoicism, to do the sorts of things that a Stoic would do, to use things properly, like your body, like the weights, like your membership. But it's not you. You are fundamentally your faculty of choice. You are fundamentally what it is that you bring into every situation. Your property can disappear. Any skill that you learn, that can disappear. It's so easy for us to identify ourselves with things that the Stoics would consider either to be external to us entirely, like a tie, or a YouTube presence, or having a chalkboard, or to identify ourselves with the roles that we have. I am this kind of worker. I'm this kind of guy. I have this title, and that's what I am. Epictetus says, no, that's not what you are. So if somebody has a better title than you, great, they've got a better title than you. If you've got a better title than them, great, that's fine. But don't think that you're better than them as a person, or that they're better than you as a person. And if they try that line, now you know exactly how to deconstruct that kind of argument.
Somebody is hasty about bathing. Do not say that he bathes badly, but that he is hasty about bathing. Somebody drinks a great deal of wine. Do not say that he drinks badly, but that he drinks a good deal. For until you have decided what judgment prompts him, how do you know what he is doing is bad? And thus the final result will not be that you receive convincing sense impressions of some things, but give your assent to others.
Chapter 45 contains a very useful reminder about the haste with which we judge other people, or the ways in which we, as we say, jump to conclusions. Something that we want to avoid if we want to make progress on the Stoic path to freedom, tranquility, and happiness. So notice the two examples that he gives. These are examples that I think we can still relate to today. We might think of many other similar examples. He says, somebody is hasty about bathing. They bathe too quickly, right? Let's extend this to personal hygiene in general. They're too quick to get in and out of the shower. When they shave, perhaps they don't do a very good job. Their hair is usually a mess. When they tie their tie, they don't really pay attention to what they're doing. That's fine. Now, how are we going to judge that? What are we going to say about it? Notice too that the judgment lies in how we describe it to ourselves. And the judgment is coming to us as something that we can assent to. It's an appearance, and then we go out to meet the appearance with our judgment. So we can say to ourselves, that person bathes hastily, so they bathe badly, right? They're not actually doing the job right. They're not doing things the way a person ought to. Or we can just say, okay, all I really know is that they're awfully quick in the bathroom. They don't seem to spend an awful lot of time on personal hygiene. I'm not quite sure how one gets clean in that short of a time, but I'll just leave it at that. Instead of saying they're doing a terrible job, instead of saying they don't bathe, the way a person should, We just leave it at that observation. The other one that he has as an example is a person drinks a great deal of wine. Say that they drink a great deal. Be factual about it. Don't say that they drink badly or that they, make up, things like, well, they're a stinking drunk. Don't jump to conclusions about the evidence that you have in front of you, and you're going to be a lot better off when it comes to judging other people. We can understand this in our own cases because we want people to pay attention to the whole person before they make snap judgments about us, although we fear that they're going to make that, and so there's some things often that we do, like, dressing in certain ways or speaking in certain ways, not speaking in other ways, bringing up certain topics, not bringing up other topics, comporting ourselves in different ways. And so, if we're worried about other people doing this to us, why are we doing it to them? And it's not just a matter of what you might call fairness about judgment or assumptions or perceptions. There's something more here at stake. He says, until you've decided what judgment prompts this person to do what they're doing, the dogma, the opinion, the idea that they have, the perspective that they have, until you know, as we say, what's going on in their head, or until we know, as we sometimes say, what makes that person tick, we don't know why they're doing things the way they are. And often that why turns out to be more important than the what about their doing. Somebody might be bathing very quickly and spending relatively little time on personal hygiene because they're living in a dorm with a lot of other people and they're very nervous about their body and about other people seeing them, and so they want to spend as little time as possible in a common area where other people see them walking around in a towel. It could be that they don't like the feel of water on their body. It could be that they said, I want to stink as much as possible, so I'm going to spend as little time on personal hygiene as possible. These are all live possibilities, right? And we can't automatically assume that, well, it's this motivation rather than this motivation. We don't know until we do a few things. We could ask the person. Of course, they could lie to us, but oftentimes people are willing to tell us some things, and even when they lie, sometimes they reveal things to us. We can pay attention to them over time, see how they behave in similar situations, piece together kind of a mosaic that tells us about how that person is motivated. We can ask other people if they know what's going on with this person. There's a lot of different ways in which we can get better information. But like he says, until you've decided what judgment is prompting him, how do you know what he is doing is actually bad? How do you know if it's being badly done? Kakos in the Greek. It might be that the person just doesn't know what they're doing. It could be that they were brought up that way, and they think that's a good way to behave. All of these are things that require us to invest a bit of time and attention before engaging in judgment. Now, what he says here in the last part of this chapter actually brings in some technical terms that the Stoics used, and so I want to mention a few things about that. He says, the final result will not be that you receive convincing sense impressions of some things, but give your assent to others. So what does all that mean? Okay, so the convincing sense impressions are the phantasias kataleptikas. This was a criteria that the Stoics used in their epistemology, in their views about what we could rely on, in their views about what counted as knowledge. The Stoics thought that at a certain point, we reach the bedrock, we reach the reality of what's going on. There are appearances, right, fantasia, but some of the fantasia really do show us the way things truly are. Those are the ones that we can trust in. Those are the kataleptikos, or kataleptikes in this case, right? And we don't know whether we've reached that bedrock or not if we're making decisions like that about how people are behaving. So to take the bathing example again, until we actually understand the motivation of the person, and that doesn't necessarily take, spending years with them or even days. We could ask them what their motivation is. And if we think that we've reached the bedrock of that, where there's no further explanation, now we can make a determination. Now we have a good ground for that sort of thing. We're not going to be off base when we do it. What he also talks about here is giving assent, sun kata tithesthai. You've got two different prepositions, sun and kata, and then tithesthai is coming from the verb which means to place or to set. So think of these all together as something presents itself, and we're not sure whether it's that way or not, but we give assent to it. We say, okay, I'm going to go along with this. What Epictetus is saying here is if you actually do follow this guideline about not making judgments about whether something is done well or done poorly, but just describe things the way they are until you got more information and can piece together a coherent picture, you're not going to be having some things that you really can rely on and other things that you're just assenting to but probably are wrong about. It's not going to be a mishmash or a mixture of these things. You're actually going to arrive at the point where you have all of these things that are based on reality, and you can be sure about them. So this is actually good advice in how to deal with other people. It's also going to have the beneficial side effect of probably not causing a lot of conflicts with other people as you tell them, hey, you're behaving like a jerk, you're acting badly, when you've made a judgment that they're doing so without actually knowing what's going on with them. It may be that they do in fact feel they're acting badly, but it may be that they think that they're doing the most rational thing in the world. So you want to find out why they're behaving the way that they are.
On no occasion call yourself a philosopher, and do not, for the most part, talk among laymen about your philosophic principles, but do what follows from your principles. For example, at a banquet, do not say how people ought to eat, but eat as a man ought. For remember how Socrates had so completely eliminated the thought of ostentation that people came to him when they wanted him to introduce them to philosophers, and he used to bring them along. So well did he submit to being overlooked. And if talk about some philosophic principle arises among laymen, keep silence for the most part, for there is a great danger that you will spew up immediately what you have not digested. So when a man tells you that you know nothing, and you, like Socrates, are not hurt, then rest assured that you are making a beginning with the business you have undertaken. For sheep, too, do not bring their fodder to the shepherds and show how much they've eaten, but they digest their food within them, and on the outside produce wool and milk. And so do you, therefore, make no display to the laymen of your philosophical principles, but let them see the results which come from these principles when digested.
Chapter 46 contains some really excellent advice for those of us who are engaged in studying philosophy, in particular Stoic philosophy, which is a practical philosophy. How should we behave? Should we tell people that we're philosophers? Should we tell people that we're studying philosophy? Or should we do something different? So Epictetus says, don't call yourself a philosopher. There's plenty of people out there doing that. All you got to do is, type in Google search, I am a philosopher. You'll see all sorts of people who are making those sorts of statements. So he says, do not, for the most part, talk among laymen, that is, people who are not on the way in philosophy, people who are not studying philosophy, people who are not interested in philosophy, but perhaps could be. Don't talk to them about your philosophical principles, or in the Greek tone, theorematon, the things that you contemplate, the things that you think through. Why not? Why should you avoid this? Are you being deceptive in doing so? No. you're actually trying to be more truthful in certain respects. He says, do what follows from your principles. Instead of talking about it, do it. Behave like a philosopher. He says, for example, at a banquet, do not say how people ought to eat. Don't be one of those busybodies who comes along and says, the Stoics would tell us that we should have smaller portions. And here's a hint about that. If you take the plate and you make the plate smaller, the smaller portion will look bigger by comparison. People don't want to hear that sort of thing. And they definitely don't want to hear that some philosopher has this idea. If they do want to hear that sort of thing, it will be afterwards, after you've actually behaved like a philosopher, which means behaving like the kind of person who has something worth studying or learning from. So he goes on and he says, don't tell people how to eat. Eat as a man ought. And don't worry about whether other people are catching on to it or not. In most cases, they're not going to. Because most people aren't paying attention most of the time, right? It's very selective what they're doing. And when they do pay attention, perhaps half the time, most people get wrong what's actually going on. Well, this is the human condition, right? But if you behave in the way that you ought to, in the way that your philosophical principles say is a good way for you to behave, you can then display to other people what philosophy leads to. And then if they ask you, hey, why is it that I never see you pigging out and taking extra helpings and depriving other people of them at the dinner table or acting like a jerk in conversation? He said, well, that's because I've been studying Stoic philosophy. People are way more likely to be interested in Stoic philosophy and think that there's something there than if they see you behaving like everybody else, but talking the talk about Stoic philosophy. And we can say this about really any sort of transformative spiritual or philosophical practice. He goes on and he says, remember how Socrates so completely eliminated the thought of ostentation that people came to him when they wanted him to introduce them to philosophers. And he used to bring them along. Socrates was a philosopher. If you read Plato's dialogues, you will see people saying to Socrates, hey, can you introduce me to this guy? Because I hear he's a philosopher. And Socrates said, yeah, okay, let's go talk with him. And then usually what ends up happening in the dialogue is it turns out that you see Socrates really is the philosopher and the other person isn't. But Socrates doesn't come out and say, oh, if you want a philosopher, I'm your guy right here. Don't bother with him. He doesn't do that at all. He's humble. He's unassuming. He's willing to let people see and make up their own mind. He doesn't have to tell them how to behave. A Stoic is not going to be a busybody. A Stoic is not going to be somebody who is constantly talking about Stoicism unless perhaps other people ask him to do so, or he's got a job like Epictetus to teach in a school where people can come and study if they want or leave if they want. So he says, if talk about some philosophical principle does arise among lay people, what should you do? And how does that sort of thing happen? If you think about our culture, you can click around on the internet and you'll find all sorts of interesting magazines, some of them labeled philosophy this or philosophical this, and there'll be cool articles and people like to read them and post them on their social media and talk about them at dinner parties or mention them here and there. And okay, so there's like a intellectual environment in which people might in fact talk about philosophy. What should you do? Notice what Epictetus tells you. He doesn't say, aha, now here's your opening. Get in there and start preaching Stoicism. No, he says, if talk about some philosophic principle arises among laymen, keep silence for the most part. Why? Well, maybe you're not the one to actually teach it to them. Maybe you haven't fully worked it through. If that's the case, you're probably not going to be that helpful to them. Certainly not as helpful as you imagine that you're going to be. So what would be an example of this? He says, there's a great danger you will spew up immediately what you have not digested. When we take in philosophy, here's the metaphor, we're eating, right? And then we have to digest it, and we have to make it part of who we are. So with Stoicism, if we don't walk the walk, and we don't walk it for quite a ways so that it becomes the way in which we walk, and not just the direction that we're hopefully heading towards, when we talk the talk, it's going to be extremely unconvincing to other people. Understandably so. So he goes on and he says, when a man tells you that you know nothing, and you, like Socrates, are not hurt, then rest assured you are making a beginning with the business you've undertaken. If you can take other people telling you, yeah, you don't really know much about this Stoic philosophy, I know all about it. I've read some Marcus Aurelius and some Epictetus and some Seneca, and clicked on some websites where people are talking about that, and gone to these lectures, and I bought myself some books, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not hurting you for somebody else to make all these claims. It might be true, although probably not, because most people who are serious about Stoicism have read this and don't act like that. But it's not hurting you. It's not affecting you in your core of who you are. As a matter of fact, it's just making them look a certain way. So he says, sheep do not bring their fodder to the shepherds and show how much they've eaten, going back to the digestion example, but they digest their food within them, and on the outside produce wool and milk. So what should you do with the people who are not yet into philosophy, or may never be into philosophy? He says, do you therefore make no display to the laymen of your philosophical principles? You don't need to talk about this sort of thing with them. Let them see the results which come from these principles when digested. So, to take a very common example, if your friends and family who know you, who've been with you for a long time, see you behaving in a different way, having more self-control, not lapsing into these negative emotional states and lashing out at other people or withdrawing from other people, handling the difficulties that naturally arise within social life and even our workplaces and technology, and pick whatever else you like, even the weather, handling those things well rather than getting upset like you used to. Eventually they will ask you. They'll say, what's different? What's going on here? How come you're not as upset as you used to be? Why are you behaving? Are you after something? And then you can say to them, well, there's these philosophical principles. And you don't even have to say, I've been studying Stoicism. You could say things like, well, there's some things that are in our control and other things that aren't in our control. And I've really been concentrating on the things that are in my control to try to improve them, and not worrying about the things that are outside of my control. Notice you didn't have to say Stoicism at all in that, but you're talking about the principles of Stoicism. You do that by invitation, you might say, not by way of lecturing people, not by way of putting up a facade about what a great philosopher or what a great Stoic or whatever else you want to say, spiritual practitioner that you are. Because if you do that, you're not going to be convincing. If you do show people, to use this metaphor of the sheep, if you digest the Stoicism and then you show them your wool, show them what you've actually produced, that in fact will be convincing.